Begin your centered zipper by preparing your zipper. First, remove the top stop so that you can have two open ends. Next, you're going to put a new top stop that is just a single on the top coils of your zipper. Clamp it on first from the side and then at an angle from the top. You can do this on both sides of the zipper or one for your sample only. Next, using your square of fabric, cut it in half down the center and lay the two pieces of fabric together with right sides facing each other. Head on over to your machine and set your stitch length to a 5, and then begin your sample with a basting stitch with no back stitch. Now, sometimes you might like to set your zipper down before you start doing this to mark where you're going to stop. But if you just set the top of the zipper at the top of your sample, you're going to stop your basting stitch right where the bottom stop is. Set your stitch length to 2.5, and then do a back stitch, a straight stitch, and end with a back stitch. This part of the bottom of the sample will be permanently attached, and the top is a baste only for while you are constructing the zipper. Head on over to the iron and press the two seam allowances open. First, start by pressing the seam allowances open on the back. Then flip your sample over and press it on the top, making sure that there aren't any tucks. If there are, go ahead and just spread the fabric open so that the fabric is completely flat. Making sure not to press your ruler, you're going to set your ruler down so that it is underneath the center of your sample. Zip your zipper all the way up so that the zipper head is facing down on top of the seam allowance, and then line up the back stitch of your sample to the bottom edge of the stop. So you'll see this little metal piece at the bottom of your zipper. Make sure that that is just above where you backstitched. Pin at the bottom, and then you are going to temporarily pin the piece at the top so that the zipper is centered over the seam. And then you'll start to be able to feel the coil straddling in between the two seams. Place a couple of pins there to hold the zipper in place so that it is centered. Next, you're going to unpin that top pin that you had and unzip your zipper a couple of inches. Now you're going to rotate this over and line up the coil with the edge of the fabric, and you can pin it from the back first if you'd like, and then I'll remove it and put it back in at the front, or you can pin it however works best for you. With a regular stitch at the sewing machine, we're going to start stitching the zipper on the right side of the sample. You're going to be lining up the narrow edge of your presser foot with the coil, and this will give you about 1/4 of an inch away from the seam allowance that you're stitching. Start by stitching on the right side of the zipper, and then once you've stitched down a couple of inches, you can pivot your sample, and sometimes I like to keep the needle in the machine, and then pull the zipper tab back up. This is a little challenging, but don't worry, you're going to get through it. Continue sewing down the right side of the center of the zipper about 1/4 inch away, and just using that coil as a guide, and then you're going to be stopping just below where that bottom metal piece is, that bottom metal stop. I like to feel this with my fingers. You can also decide if you want to put a pin just underneath it, and then once you're about 1/8 of an inch below, you're going to keep the needle in the fabric, pivot the sample, and you're going to stitch underneath that bottom stop. Make sure that you're not stitching on top of it because it might break your needle. Then we're going to sew up the left side of the sample, and then once we get to the zipper head, this is a little bit challenging as well, but you just kind of have to pivot your sample around and then unzip the zipper as far as you can. And sometimes you have to sort of push it down a little bit while it's underneath the sewing machine. And then once that zipper head is out of the way, you're going to set the presser foot back down, and you're going to continue sewing up at that 1/4 inch seam allowance to the top of the sample, ending with a back stitch. After you've clipped your threads, You'll head on over to your table and use a seam ripper to pull the basting stitch out of the center of your sample. If you cut all of the little threads off using the blade of your seam ripper, you'll then have to individually pick each of them. So I like to try to seam rip a little bit, and then I pull and rip the thread as I go down. You can move your zipper head up and down to make it easier for you to remove this basting stitch. And if you stitched up a little too high and started your back stitch of the sample above where your stitch is, you might have to come in and cut that just a little bit, just like I did. And then once you've removed all of those threads down to where you pivoted at the bottom of your sample, you can make sure that your zipper is not getting caught in the seam allowance, and then head over to the iron. At the iron, you're going to press the zipper flat. Make sure that you're not keeping the iron on there too long, otherwise you might melt the coils. Once you've pressed the bottom, you can unzip the zipper, press the top so that it's nice and smooth, and you have now completed your centered zipper sample.